Today marks 20 years since the U.S. began the 2003 invasion of Iraq, so we wanted to take a look at how the war was documented through the images we saw during more than a decade of conflict. Joining us now is Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Lynsey Addario, who has chronicled conflicts around the globe and is the author of the best-selling It's What I Do, A Photographer's Life of Love and War. Lynsey, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Sure. My pleasure.
You captured so many images from throughout the Iraq War, but for many, it's those images from Abu Ghraib prison, which were not taken by a photojournalist, that still stand out as some of the most iconic and troubling images from the war. What was it about those photos that changed the trajectory of the war and how the U.S. was perceived?
I mean, it's interesting because I myself was there from 2 months before the war started, and then really there was no plan for the aftermath. And the soldiers, the American soldiers, it was not absolutely their fault. They just weren't prepped to run a country after the fall of Saddam Hussein. And so, as you can imagine, it was completely chaotic. And then the insurgency started in that summer of 2003. So when the photographs of Abu Ghraib came out, they sort of symbolized all of the tension and, you know, the mistreatment of Iraqis from American soldiers who were terrified and dealing with the insurgency but unprepared. And it was just sort of, it was so sad because there was an opportunity in the beginning of the war for it to unfold differently, frankly, and it just became more disastrous as time went on, and really we know how it ended.
You also captured many images of Iraqi civilians, either in moments of grief as well as in stressful situations such as being questioned or detained by U.S. forces. What story were you able to tell with some of those images about how Iraqis experienced the war and the human costs of the conflict?
You know, look, as journalists in Iraq, we had the great privilege of covering both the Iraqi side, living amongst Iraqi civilians, and also doing military embeds, so covering the side of the American soldiers. And I think what I was trying to tell was just the daily life, you know, how for Iraqis there was constant sort of humiliation, being stopped at gunpoint by young soldiers pointing their guns at their wives, their children, terrifying many women and children just who weren't used to being treated like that, going into people's homes in the middle of the night, but then also the side of the Americans who were being attacked constantly. Once the insurgency started, it was almost daily attacks against American forces. So, of course, also documenting what was happening to American troops and covering sort of the siege of Fallujah when Marines, you know, hundreds of Marines were coming out wounded in the base at Balad. It was extraordinary to have access to that, but to also see the toll of the war on both sides.
You've taken photos in virtually every theater of conflict in the past 2 decades, including your latest from the war in Ukraine. How have you processed what you've seen, and how are you able to keep your focus when there's often so much chaos happening around you?
It's difficult. I mean, certainly Iraq was really the first combat I ever photographed, and it was a real learning curve. I mean, the first time I was in an ambush outside of Fallujah in the village of Garma, it was right after I had been kidnapped for the first time. Then I was out with the Marines. We got ambushed. I mean, I forgot to take pictures for the first, 10 minutes of the ambush because I was so terrified. And so really it's about, trying to stay focused on what story I'm trying to tell, what's unfolding in my viewfinder, and also, of course, keeping myself safe and alive, trying to find cover, trying to find some place to hide and still be able to photograph.
I find it so fascinating that you say just, like, oh, during the time when I was, kidnapped, or during the time when I just so casually. How do you decompress after all of that?
I mean, I sort of have a system now when I come home from Ukraine, because Ukraine is the war I've been covering all year for the New York Times. You know, I have a family. I have 2 small kids. I have a 3-year-old and an 11-year-old, and that sort of immediately puts me at home and grounds me in a way that I don't have time for, you know, to sort of catch up on sleep and think about and process everything I've seen. I try to really do that in the field. I also try to continue to process whenever I can. Exercise is a real source of release for me and a source of kind of meditation. But just surrounding myself with people who I love, friends, family, is really important to me.
Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Lynsey Addario, we thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your insight and the way that you're able to communicate to us without any words often, just with a photograph of what's happening worlds away.
Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.